I don't know. Everyone has withdrawn their endorsement of Platner, and I think the allegations are suspicious. I'm just gonna say it.
What's in the air? You know what's in the air. You know what's in the air. You know what's in the air. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so after the Graham Platner news, there have been mostly people condemning him, rescinding their support for him, etc. And he's had a couple defenders in the news as well. People like Ryan Grimm and the Young Turks hosts, as we're going to talk about here. But also in some other interesting places, some more establishment voices are also poking holes in the story surrounding Graham Platner, which is just odd. It's kind of an odd spread. And I really just want to get into the dynamics of that, why certain parts of this story are very convincing and why some people seem to be poking holes in it. Although I don't fall on that side of it personally. I am more convinced by this story than some people like Cenk and Anna here, who honestly are just like really good at having bad takes at this point. Particularly Anna, she seems to take the craft of coming up with bad takes very seriously. And it also is a little inconsistent here, which is what I want to get to. But they also have some skepticisms about the sources of this Oppo research, not the sources of the story, but the people who kind of cobble these things together, as well as the timing. And there are some specifics about the story itself that aren't the strongest, which are valid to point to. So I want to get to all that, as well as the state of the race. As of right now, Graham Platner has said that he is suspending campaign operations and that he intends to file the paperwork to withdraw, which is not the same as actually having done that. And to me, his use of language seems very deliberate there. So we'll see if that changes by later today. But for now, here is the Young Turk segment where they're essentially being skeptical of this story. I think Anna Kasparian's mostly unbearable at this point. I don't really agree with the points that she makes here, but I do want to get into the arguments that they're making here and some of the other dynamics of this story. So here's that.
What do you have that actually connects this literally? Graham Platner to raping this victim?
Yeah, she reached out to him the day after via Instagram, and essentially, told him that she didn't want to hear from him again. She told him that morning as well, and we looked at messages that she had sent to others in the months after this happened through social media.
But you were able to see those DMs?
She tried to recover those DMs. We did not. We were not able to review those DMs, but she described them to us. We also, long before he was before he was a political candidate, we saw her essentially explain to others that he was, quote, in her words, consensually careless, end quote.
Right, but were you able to see the interactions between Graham Platner and this alleged victim? Did you actually physically see them? Did she produce them for you?
She attempted to uncover them. But was unable to.
Willie? So, Razakot told Politico that she had exchanged text messages with Platner that night, telling him not to come over before he did come over, right? Now, she said that she wasn't in the mood for company. Later that evening, she said that she realized when she heard a sound at the stairs or on the stairs that he had let himself in. She left the door unlocked, which allowed for him to let himself in. Now, she previously described reckless and unsettling behavior by Platner in a New York Times article, but she didn't go into the details. She refused to elaborate, and she said she didn't want to do it, specifically because she didn't want to be known as a rape victim, okay? But she decided to do it a week before an incredibly important electoral deadline in this Senate race in Maine. Personally, as a woman, if someone raped me, I wouldn't call them consensually challenged, but maybe that's just the way she communicates. I don't know. Further, there was a therapist that she spoke to recently about this alleged rape from all the way back in 2021. So she didn't tell her therapist about it at the time. She didn't file a police report. She apparently told an ex-boyfriend who she started dating in 2022. I don't know. Everyone has withdrawn their endorsement of Platner, And I think the allegations are suspicious. I'm just gonna say it. I think Platner's tattoo and his explanation of how he handled the tattoo after realizing it was a Nazi tattoo was way more problematic than these claims. That's my thought.
By the way, in all of these stories, it's barely ever mentioned that they were in a relationship at the time.
She spent more time elaborating how disgusted she was that he might have slept with a lot of women than she did about the alleged rape. When she's talking to an acquaintance who's asking her about Graham Platner because she's thinking about fixing a friend up with him.
Yeah, so every person that they go to, the current boyfriend, the therapist, the other folks, people that normally in a story like this go, yes, at the time she told me this, and this is a text message we have, or etc. None of that is here other than the two texts that Anna read you. One of them is barely relevant. The other one is the one that has the careless comment, right? Were there all these different opposition research groups targeting Susan Collins and calling all of her ex-boyfriends and looking through her text messages, asking about therapists? None, zero. Is there any about like establishment candidates, Democrat or Republican? Almost never.
I've been skeptical of Platner since the tattoo thing. And you know that because we had it out on the show on that issue. How do you realize you have a Nazi tattoo and wait until you're running for a congressional or for a Senate seat to remove it? I just don't get it. I don't understand that. So Platner wasn't my favorite. I'm not going out of my way to defend him because he's someone that I desperately want to win. The reason why I'm doing this right now is because I'm looking at the facts we have in front of us right now, and I'm sorry. I just don't think the evidence rises to the occasion of Politico publishing this as if he is already proven guilty as a rapist.
So my guess is, based on these context clues, but it's just a guess. I don't know, but I do know it was definitely targeting. So is that it was people that are part of the Israeli lobby that marked him for destruction, and that is why mainstream media is like, oh, uncorroborated. The last New York Times piece, we talked to every single girlfriend, didn't get a single thing other than a GOP operative. We'll print it. We don't care about two sources. Our rules go out the window when we're ordered to attack.
Yeah, so I mean, some of the specifics that Anna Kasparian says about how like if a man did this to me, I wouldn't let him stay in my house, or I would have talked to this person, I would have talked to that person. That's where she just seems like incredibly callous to me. And you get this from the right all the time. Why didn't she go to the police? Why didn't she do this? Why didn't she do that? I think that we've kind of accepted at this point, certainly on the left-leaning side of things, that people's reactions to that sort of thing are complicated. And what she's totally breezing past here, which I think is pretty reprehensible actually, is the fact that she was in a relationship with him, and the fact that she can't imagine an event like that happening when your partner is drunk but also behaving in a way that's threatening, maybe not outwardly violent like he's purposely hurting you, but he's certainly using your body, doing things to you without your consent. That is the substance of what she's saying he did here. She's not saying he came in and beat her up and was a total monster, just that he took what he wanted from her and then fell asleep. And so if she can't imagine a scenario where that would happen to a woman, and then that woman wakes up in the same house with him the next day and tells him to leave, and then later communicates with him saying that she didn't appreciate that and she doesn't want to talk to him anymore. So that's the sticking point in this story that they get to with the whole Mika Brzezinski segment, because she deleted this DM. So if this DM existed that supposedly Graham Platner saw or responded to or something, according to her, she deleted that at some point. And what's interesting in that Mika Brzezinski segment on Morning Joe is how she asks him, what proof do you have of this? And the first thing that he brings up is proof that he doesn't actually have. I mean, that was a weird move. That was a weird thing to do. And it leads to the whole rest of the segment being about that specific set of DMs. Did you actually see these DMs between her and Graham Platner? So the fact that he hasn't seen that means that that was the last thing that he should have said there. The first thing that he should have said would be the correspondence that she had with another friend of hers at the time who was asking her if she should set somebody up with Graham. And that's a point where Anna says, I wouldn't just use the word consensually careless. Now, to me, what it seems like she's trying to do there is very lightly caution against him. I think that what she said in that conversation is enough to make her friend say, maybe I'll pump the brakes on that a little bit. And that's really all that needed to be accomplished, right? If she doesn't want to lob a crazy accusation out there, because again, this was something that happened while they were together, and the implications of this story aren't just necessarily he's a monster who violently broke into my house and did this and that to me, but the substance of what he did to her doesn't change. And it seems entirely plausible to me that he was blackout drunk and that he did that. And just to stop and explain real quick my thoughts on it, the reason I find that convincing is because it tracks with the rest of not just these stories that we've heard from some of these other women, but the pattern of behavior associated with the type of service that he did and his apparent attitude about it. One of the things that one of these girlfriends said about him in the past that he said is if anybody ever broke into our house, I would rape them to establish dominance. So to me, that honestly adds a lot of ring of truth to this recent story, because it's kind of solidifying this idea as a guy who, you know, gets off on that dominance and sees that as sort of an okay thing to do, an okay human urge to engage in. So that's not the same as proof. And it is valid to question some of the aspects of this story. Dropsite is also reporting, perhaps a little exaggeratedly, that at one point she, in this chain of correspondence that night, indicated that she wanted her glutes massaged or something, and then later said, no, I don't want you to come over, but he came over anyway. The implication being there that he thought that that was an invitation to come over. I frankly don't really see what's the point of putting that out there as though it is a story in and of itself. It doesn't really change anything about the story, but it's undeniable that this Politico story is a little weak. And that's what Cenk's saying. He's saying, well, this story is weak and the other story is weak. Although I think it's pretty clear that these stories were meant to be together. And if you take this story and you combine it with the original story about misconduct that dropped about him, suddenly the entire thing becomes a much more detailed story. It seems like this story was the missing piece from that original story about his misconduct. So there's no doubt, though, that the process through which this information has come out is 100% the product of meddling. And Cenk Uygur, in talking about this, is pointing to, like, you know, behind the scenes Oppo research groups that essentially specialize in digging this type of stuff up. And that's where these things come from. And if you don't think that's where they come from, you're delusional. And he's 100% right about that. And that has been exactly what's happening this entire time with Graham Platner, is that you have groups behind the scenes that are doing whatever they can. They put feelers out there. That's how the tattoo thing came up. That's how the Reddit stuff came up. These are scrapes that are happening. And then in the case of the backstory stuff and the personal history stuff, they put feelers out and see if they can get anybody who is in Graham Platner's past to say bad things about him, interesting things about him, corroborate bad things about him. So in terms of the timing of this story, she said she didn't originally want to tell the whole thing about the rape and put that on the record because she didn't want to fuck up the momentum of the movement. She believed in the Graham Platner movement, and she didn't want to be known as a rape victim. Another thing that Anna Kasparian kind of casts aside. To me, this woman seems pretty honest. She went on a CNN segment, albeit with Jake Tapper, who is a friend of the Israeli lobby, and that's essentially what they're pointing to, is saying that this whole thing is kind of coordinated by the people who obviously have the most interest in Graham Platner not moving forward, the Israeli lobby or other sources, although Cenk Uygur does say that he doesn't know that for sure. And I think that that's likely true. I think that it can be true that that is the source, or some entity like that is the source of a story like this, because they have the resources to suss it out. They have the ability to stay in contact with this person. They have the sort of standards where they keep certain things off the record, put certain things on the record, which maintains trust with sources. The actual original source, the Republican operative that was behind the story the first time, came out and said that she felt betrayed by the outlet that originally printed that story because she thought it was going to be a beefier story. She thought there were other accusations that were going to take precedent over hers. But because that accusation didn't actually make it to the record, she ended up being the one who had the major accusation made in that article, which essentially was a bullshit accusation, and she got a bunch of shit over the fact that she's a Republican operative and obviously has an agenda. So again, these things can all be true at once. She was a Republican operative and did have an agenda, and maybe had like shreds of a story about Platner, not much to work with, But this girl's story was really the linchpin. And so anyways, all of that is to say that at this point, the pressure has been enough that Graham Platner has announced that he is suspending his campaign operations, which, as I said before, is not the same as ending your campaign, but he's saying that he intends to end the campaign. But what he's been saying up until now is that he's not going to do that unless there is a process to replace him with somebody who has similar politics and isn't going to just be some corporate Democrat. Because if nobody was paying attention to this and everybody was just like, well, fuck Graham Platner, then the corporate Democrats would absolutely use this as an opportunity to just install somebody. So because there's been an enormous amount of pressure about this, and I've actually seen a lot of voices saying they can't just replace Graham Platner with anybody, it has to be somebody that the movement that brought him forward can actually support. So that's what I've been saying this whole time is the most important thing about all of this is the platform. And it's very easy to get lost in all the various social or personality type conversations that come into this, like, oh, how could you have supported this person? Or obviously there's hidden racisms or misogynies or whatever in people's support of this guy. And I think all that is true, but the most important thing and the way that we can maintain a steady, consistent movement going forward, a consistent movement in the direction of left-wing politics, is to remain committed to that as a platform. And people like Platner, even in their horrendous miscalculation and the mess he's made, still did push the movement forward by running a popular campaign on that platform. So we don't know exactly how that's going to come out yet. I'll get to the details of what they're planning to do in Maine in a second. But my point is that if the priority is the platform, then we can make progress in the face of all of these things. And we have to be relentless, because the people that we're up against are always relentless. They're shameless, and they advance their project absolutely no matter what happens. And if one candidate gets knocked out because of a scandal, they got another one right there ready to go. And they back that candidate 100%. And the only way we're going to do that is being less personality based and more platform based. That doesn't mean, though, that we ignore things like this in the case of Graham Platner, that we let terrible candidates be champions of the movement. I don't think so. I think the same urgency that pushed us to get Graham Platner over the finish line of the primary and defend him in the face of some mounting accusations is the same urgency to now push him aside in favor of somebody who shares the platform. It's the same urgency, it's the same motivation. And we can actually have a better process of moving through bad candidates to good ones if we are keeping the steady churn of staying focused on the movement. And if somebody's not aligned with that, you get them out of the way in favor of somebody who is. And what it seems like they're going to do is some kind of delegation, like a large convention of delegates from each of the counties in Maine. And so the process of that isn't exactly clear. It's not the worst case scenario, because the maximum amount of people involved and people that are appointed by these councils in local counties, then the closer to a democratic process this will be. It's not exactly democratic, but there are a lot of people involved in this delegation process who were perfectly aligned with Platner, perfectly happy to support him, and will have an interest in ensuring that whoever replaces him has a similar platform. So people not relenting on supporting the platform and even being willing to use Platner as a cudgel, him refusing to actually file the paperwork to withdraw until there is a guarantee that this process is going to be fair. And it seems like Troy Jackson is emerging as a favorite to replace him. He has a pretty solid DSA aligned platform, but has some issues with, being kind of conservative on social issues in the past. So that will come up. There are other candidates who are lesser well known. The candidate that I believe Platner floated as being a replacement is lesser well known. And there's also a debate about whether or not the endorsement of Platner is even going to help whoever succeeds him. What I don't think people should do, and I see a lot of people doing this, is assume that voters in Maine, all of a sudden because of this story, have completely reversed course on him. That is not the pattern of what's happening here. There are people like me and like people much bigger than me in the media space who realize because of this story that it's too much. It's untenable to continue to support him, and that's why only contrarians like Cenk and Anna in this instance, who are willing to contradict things that they've said in the past, contradict the fact that they have spoken out about their own sexual assaults not being taken seriously in the past. Anna Kasparian, not Cenk Uygur has. It takes that type of contrarian personality to continue defending him at this point, because it's not just this story on its own that is so convincing, it is all of it. When you stack all of these things together, to me, it paints a very clear picture of somebody I don't want to support anymore. But I'm still glad that he got over the finish line in the primary, and people shouldn't assume that that support that got him over that line in the primary has completely evaporated. It hasn't. A lot of these people in Maine want Graham Platner to stay in the race. He seems to be losing support. Other Democrats are gaining support in the internal polls that they're doing to replace him, but it's unclear that the people of Maine have abandoned Graham Platner yet over this. I think it's kind of a done deal anyway. It doesn't seem like he's going to be the candidate, but I do think that he should hold out and use his leverage to make sure that whoever is someone who's aligned with the movement.
I'm in the pocket, and they know they can't slow it, can't stop shit. How the game so cold, so toxic. Can't drop cause they're in somebody's pocket. For me that's not it.